everybody! Happy holidays and welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. Every year we get a lot of requests to make a tree skirt, so this year, just in time for Christmas, that's what we're going to make. You can make your tree skirt as deep as you need to suit the height of the tree you're going to make it for. We have a little tree, so I'm making what I consider to be a medium-sized tree skirt. My skirt is 46 centimeters or 18 inches from top edge to bottom point. This skirt has a seam and it buttons shut. So if your tree sits in the middle of your room or maybe it sits on a table, no matter what angle you come at this tree skirt from, that neat button seam will still give it a tidy 12-pointed look. And if your seam is going to show, you might consider using really fancy buttons and showcasing that seam like you would the front of a fancy blouse as opposed to the modest closure on the back of a skirt. But I'll leave that entirely up to you guys. We will have a written copy of this pattern available for sale in our Etsy shop, and there's a link to our Etsy shop in the description box down below. And a super big thank you to everyone who has popped in and done some holiday shopping. You have really helped support us here at the Jayda InStitches show. It goes a long way to helping us make these videos every single week. So, without further ado, let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, head on over to the craft table, and we will stitch up a Christmas tree skirt together. In order to make our 12-pointed tree skirt, I'm using a medium worsted weight size 4 yarn in 3 colors, berry, forest green, and cream. I have 150 grams of each color because I am making a medium-sized tree skirt. You can make your skirt smaller or larger to suit your needs, and you will have to vary your yarn amounts accordingly. I'm using a pair of scissors, a yarn needle. Today's hook is a 6mm or a J. If you are in the UK, this is probably a 4. You're going to want some buttons. I'm using 5. You can vary up the number of buttons you use, and I'll explain that further when we get to that point. And to sew them on, you're going to want a needle and some matching thread. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. Begin with any color you want and start with a slip knot. Then we're going to chain a foundation chain row of 76. That's 7, 6. Make sure you have 76 chains in your foundation chain row, and we can begin row 1. Skip over to the 4th chain from the hook and double crochet into it. The 3 chains that precede it, or the turning chains, count as a double crochet. So the chain 3 at the beginning of every row counts as a double crochet. We're going to double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. We're going to skip over the next chain and double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. And into the next chain, we're going to work double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. And now we're going to repeat all over again. Double crochet into each of the next 2 chains. Skip a chain, double crochet into each of the next 2 chains. And then double crochet, chain 2, double crochet into the next chain. And that is your repeater all the way across. So after you work a double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, which is going to be a peak, so you're going to hear me start referring to peaks and valleys. This is our first little peak, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. You follow it with double crochet, skip, double crochet, and then double crochet, chain 2, double crochet into the same stitch. And that's the simple little repeater for all the way across row 1. So you can work on that, and I'll catch up with you at the end. Once you've finished your last pattern repeat of double crochet, chain 2, double crochet into the next 2, skip 1, double crochet into the next 2, that leaves you with 1 chain left, and you're going to work 2 double crochet into that last chain. And this is what your first row should look like. You should have 11 of these little peaks all the way around, and 12 little valley dips. Now, it might not be as easy to see the little valleys yet. Don't worry, that will become more apparent the further on we go. So let's jump right into row 2. We're going to chain 3 to begin, and as you know, the chain 3 at the beginning of every row always counts as a double crochet. We're going to work 2 double crochet into the same chain, or the same stitch that the chain 3 comes out of. So 2 double crochet into this stitch right here. You're going to double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. Skip the next 2 stitches. So see those 2 stitches right there? You're going to skip them. You're going to double crochet into the 2 stitches after those 2 that you're skipping. And that will bring you up to a chain 2 space from the previous row. And into this chain 2 space, you're going to work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet. And this is the pattern repeat. So into every chain 2 space, that's sort of the beginning of a pattern repeat, you work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet. So you get to those chain 2 spaces, they're really obvious, that's a peak. You work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet into them. Double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. Skip over the next 2. Double crochet into the 2 stitches after that. That brings you back up to another chain 2 space, and you work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet into it. And that's what you're going to repeat all the way across for row 2. And I'll catch up with you at the end. When you finish the last pattern repeat, that should bring you up to the top of the chain 3. So you'll skip the 2 chains or the 2 stitches, double crochet into the next 2. That leaves you at the top of the chain 3. Remember, the chain 3 is a double crochet. So this is technically the last stitch we're going to use in the row, and we're going to work 3 double crochet into the top of the chain 3 from the previous row. So 3 double crochet into that last stitch, which is the top of the chain 3. And that is row 2. Row 3, we're going to chain 3, turn our work. You can take a moment and look at it. This is what you should be seeing. You should still have 11 of these points, because the 2 coming together technically is your 12th point. So you should have 11 full points, and then the 2 ends count as number 12, and you should have 12 little valleys all the way around. Again, they might not be as easy to see yet, but we will get there. Chain 3 at the beginning of every row counts as a double crochet. We are going to work 2 double crochet into the same stitch that the chain 3 comes out of to begin row 3. And now, this is the new repeater. You're going to double crochet into the top of the next 3 stitches. And that should leave you with a stitch on either side of the valley. So see, the valleys now have a hole there. There will be a double crochet on the side of each side of that hole. You're going to skip those 2. And then double crochet into the next 3 stitches. So we're come down a hill to the valley. You skip the 2 double crochet on either side of the valley. You double crochet into the 3 stitches that lead you back up out of the valley. That brings you to a peak, which is that chain 2 space at the top of the point. And you're going to work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet into it. And there you go. That's what you do all the way across. Double crochet into the 3 stitches now, heading down the hill away from the peak. When you get to the valley at the bottom of this little mountain we're working here, it will be this space on which either side there is a double crochet. You skip both those double crochets, you jump over top to the next stitch, work those 3 stitches going back up the hill away from the valley. That brings you up to the chain 2 space at the peak, work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet into it. Repeat that all the way across, and I'll catch up with you at the end. When you get to the end of row 3, you should find yourself, once you've double crocheted in those last 3 stitches, at the top of the chain 3 from the previous row. We're going to finish it like we started, with 3 double crochets in the top of that chain 3. So row 3 ends with 3 double crochets in that last stitch. Now rows 1, 2, and 3 are establishing rows. So that is the established part of the pattern done. Rows 4, 5, and 6 are going to be the 3 rows that you repeat over and over and over again to get the desired length of a tree skirt that you want. Incidentally, I'm also going to change color every 3 rows, which makes it easy to kind of keep track of the pattern. So at the end of row 3, I'm finished with my red. This is my first color. So I'm going to snip my yarn, fasten off, and I'm going to do this at the end of every 3 rows. I'm going to change colors. So every time I change color, I'm going to fasten off, just like that. I'm going to grab my next color, which in this case is going to be white. To join a new color, you always create a slip knot. Pick up your pattern, find the very last stitch that you made. It'll be the chain or the double crochet. Join with a slip stitch in the top of that last stitch. Chain 3, as if you've never changed color. Turn your work and you can start the pattern as normal. So you can also choose to work over top of the tails, or you can leave them all out and weave them in at the end. It's up to you. Alright, row 4 is the first row in our repeating pattern. So rows 4, 5, and 6 get repeated over and over and over, and this is how row 4 goes. We have joined our new color, we've slip stitched, chained 3, and we are going to double crochet in the same stitch that our chain 3 comes out of. I am also going to work over top of my 2 little tails. You do not have to if you find that confusing. You're going to double crochet into each of the next 4 stitches, and you're going to skip the 2 that sit on either side of the valley. So from here on out, doesn't matter how many stitches you have going down or coming up out of the valley, you always skip the 2 that sit on either side of the valley. So row 4 is a short or a small peak row. And that means that when we get to the actual peak, the chain 2 space, we work a smaller version of the peak than we do in the other rows. And I'll explain that when we get there. So you started with a double crochet in the same stitch that you chained 3 in. You're going to double crochet into every stitch going down the mountain towards the valley. When you get to the valley, which is those 2 double crochets on either side of that little opening, you're going to skip over them and then double crochet into every stitch going back up and out of the valley. When you get to the chain 2 space, which is a peak, you're going to work a small peak. So row 4 is always a small peak. A small peak is double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. And that's it for the small peak. And then it's just the same thing all the way down. So you double crochet into every stitch going down the mountain, skip over the 2 at the very bottom on either side of that space, double crochet into every stitch going back up the mountain, and work a small peak, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet into that chain 2 space. Work that all the way across for row 4, and I'll catch up with you at the end. At the end of row 4, which is our small peak row, you're going to work 2 double crochet into the top of that chain 3 from the previous row. So row 4 begins and ends with 2 double crochet, and remember that the chain 3 at the beginning counts as a double crochet. And because row 4 is the small peak row, when you get to a chain 2 peak, you're only working double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. Now rows 5 and 6, the other 2 parts of this repeating pattern, are the same. They begin with a chain 3, return our work. This chain 3 counts as a double crochet, and these are both large peak rows. So we begin with 2 double crochet in the same stitch as the chain 3. So rows 5 and 6 begin the same way. You're going to double crochet into each step all the way down the mountain until you get to the double crochets on either side of the valley, which you skip. So, little note to self, whatever number of double crochets there are going down a hill, there is the exact and even number of double crochets going back up the other side. Now that's going to change after every row when you increase, but for every sort of up and down across a single row, this number of double crochets should be the same on both sides for every little peak and valley going across. So once you get to those 2 double crochets on either side of the valley, skip them. Double crochet in every double crochet, back up to the chain 2 space, and because rows 5 and 6 are large peak rows, when you get to the chain 2 space, you're going to work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet. So 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet in every chain 2 peak, because these are large peak rows. And the rest is the same. Every single row, you will always skip the 2 double crochets on either side of that valley space. On a row 4, you will always double crochet, chain 2, double crochet into those peak chain 2 spaces. But on a rows 5 and 6, you will always work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet. So I'm going to let you work that all the way across. I'll catch up with you at the end of row 5 for a couple more little pointers, and then I'm going to turn you loose to work your Christmas tree skirt to the size that you want. At the end of row 5 and row 6, you're going to finish with 3 double crochets in the top of the chain 3, turning from the previous row, because row 5 and row 6 are large peak rows. So rows 5 and row 6 will begin and end with 3 double crochets. Remember, the chain 3 counts as one of those double crochets. And row 4 will begin and end with 2 double crochets. So that's the difference between a large peak row, of which there are 2, and a small peak row, of which there is only 1. So the question is, why are there 3 different rows? Why are we repeating this? Why is there a small peak and then 2 large peak rows? Well, it just helps keep the expansion nice and even, and it keeps your entire project from warping and rippling. So it's just an even way to make sure that that increase doesn't get out of control. So you're going to work rows 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6 until your tree skirt is as large as you want. You're going to change colors every single row, or I should say every single 3 rows. So every 3 rows you're going to change color, just like I did here. Snip your color, fasten off, join your new color with a slip stitch and chain 3 and continue. So you can change your color every 3 rows. It's also a helpful way to remember where you are. So when you've done 3 rows of color, you know you've done small peak row, large peak, large peak. Small peak row, large peak, large peak. So repeating rows 4, 5, and 6 is a little easier to see when you're changing colors every 3 rows. Row 6 is what I'm starting here. It's exactly the same as row 5. It's a large peak row. So we begin with a chain 3 and 2 double crochets in the same stitches joining. That counts as 3 double crochets. And then you start double crocheting into every stitch all the way down to the valley. Skip the 2 double crochets on either side of the valley, and then continue up to the other side. Another little note to keep in mind as you work this pattern: after every large peak row, the number of stitches going down and up into your valleys is going to increase by 1 on either side. So if it was 5 and 5 on the first row, then the next row it'll be 6 and 6. But once you've worked a small peak row, so after row 4, your stitch count on either side of your valley will be the same as the row before, because you're not actually increasing your stitch count on a row 4. So just a little something to keep in mind if you're keeping track of your stitches. But the most important thing here to remember is when you get to a valley, you skip those 2 stitches on either side of that space. You should have the same number of stitches going down into a valley on one side as you do going up and out of it on the other, and that should be the same all the way through a row. And row 4 is a small peak row. A small peak row is double crochet, chain 2, double crochet in your peak chain 2 spaces. Rows 5 and 6 are a large peak row, and that means when you get to a chain 2 space, you work 2 double crochets, chain 2, 2 double crochets. So there you go. You can repeat rows 4, 5, and 6, 4, 5, and 6, like a little waltz, changing color at the end of every row 6, and you can work this pattern until it's as big as you like. Remember to finish off row 6 with 3 double crochets in the top of the chain 2, or I should say the top of the chain 3. And you'll be fastening off at the end of this row and changing colors because this will be the end of 3 rows. And then you start with a small peak row all over again. I will see you guys a few stripes of color later, and we'll catch up and check out where we're at. Once you've made your tree skirt as deep as you want it, mine is a medium size. It is 46 centimeters or 18 inches deep from top to bottom. It's 21 rows in total, and I began with a red stripe and I finished with a red stripe. So once it's as deep as you want it to be, fasten off your last stripe and take a moment to weave in all of your little short tails. You'll probably have a few throughout, one at the beginning, one at the end, and maybe even some where you changed colors. So take a moment and do that. Now it's time to add our buttons. These buttons are all 25 millimeters in diameter, so it's a fairly large button, and I'm going to use about 5 of them. You can use as many or as few as you like, depending on how deep you made your tree skirt. You just want to evenly space them out across the edge, one edge, doesn't matter which one, of your tree skirt, and you're going to sew them to the edge, so right to the very edge, because the other side of your tree skirt has double crochets, of course, and chain 3s along the edge, and it's just these little double crochets or chain 3s that you're going to use as little button loops. So you want a button that fits through those double crochets, and you want to sew your buttons on the edge of a double crochet all along one side so that the corresponding double crochet on the other side will fit over top of that button, and what you'll end up getting is a nice even single point at the final meet of your blanket. So I like to double up my thread. I take my needle, double up my thread, and I put a knot at the very end. This just gives me a little more strength. I'm going to put one button halfway through my first stripe. I'm going to sew it on to the very edge of the middle double crochet, and I'm going to begin by just attaching my thread by placing my needle between those two threads, and it just sort of locks it in place right there. Then I'm just going to lightly sew my button, I don't want to sew it too tightly, to the edge. And once I feel that that's on nice and firmly, I will go ahead and sew down the other 5. Once you have all your buttons sewn on, you can lay down your other edge and line it up with the edge you just put your buttons on. And if you, for example, I put my first button on the edge double crochet of the second row. So I want to find the edge double crochet of the second row of the other edge, and that's the little double crochet that I use as a button loop. Do that all the way down, matching up the corresponding double crochets or chain 3s, whatever's on the other side from where you sewed on your buttons. And that is how your skirt will button up. But remember, you probably want to put this around your tree skirt or around your tree base before you actually button it up, because that could be a little bit of a deal to get your tree skirt fit down over top of your tree.
So there you go. That's how it looks when it's all buttoned up. I will probably put my buttoned up edge to the back of the tree, as much as I like how neat and tidy that looks. This is the back of my tree skirt, and the front of it will be just the regular old pattern. That's what you're going to see when you walk up and see the front of my tree. However, a lot of trees are out in the middle of a room and you can walk all the way around them, so that's why this circular tree skirt with a very neat button-up edge is perfect for a tree that sits out in the middle of a room or one that sits nice and tidily in a corner.
And there you go, a really classic, beautiful Christmas tree skirt, something that will become an heirloom for generations to come. I hope you enjoyed making this along with us this week here on the Jayda and Stitches show. And to all of you, have a safe and happy holidays, and we will see you in the new year here on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a wonderful holiday. Bye everybody!